Um, did my friend Cindy Dempsey get in touch with you from the Women's Caucus?
I have not heard from her yet.
Okay.
Although I've been a little bit behind on my emails in the last couple of days, so I need to go back and check and see if there's anything from her. But I haven't heard from her yet. But I look forward to hearing from her.
Fantastic. Great. Yes, I shared your signature line from your email, so she'll reach you on that email or through that phone number.
That's great.
Mhm.
Okay, I need to make it a little bit loud.
Real passion is redesigning life, embracing the little.
I think we're okay to get started. We have the
Fantastic.
recording.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Suda Richko. I'm a co-founder of the Lady Liberty League, and welcome to our league, our league's fifth meeting. And I want to just introduce our core team, Tom Early, who is a co-founder as well, and our trusted moderator, and Laura Hudak, who is, I'm sorry, I'm going to mute somebody here. And Laura Hudak, who is also a co-founder and on her way to cheer on a win for the Guardians today. So she is joining us by phone. We miss her beautiful face, but she is with us by phone and later on in spirit. Who needs to mute, Tom? I'm looking for them. I keep hearing someone. Aha. Found it. So I just want to lay some ground rules. As our speaker presents, and you form questions in your mind, I would love for you to please share them in the chat. And our trusted moderator, Tom, will ask all of those questions in time after our speaker is finished. The Lady Liberty League is a volunteer collaborative that strives to facilitate a forum in which we will create a strong foundation of liberty, leadership, and legacy through educational opportunities led by verified and trusted experts in their area of expertise. We are excited today to welcome back Professor C.J. Peters. C.J. Peters is a C. Blake McDowell Jr. Professor of Law at the University of Akron School of Law. He joined the Akron Law faculty as dean in June 2017 and served until February 2022. Peters has been a legal educator for over 30 years, and he has won multiple teaching awards. He teaches and writes in the area of constitutional law, legal and constitutional theory, and federal civil procedure. His articles have been published in the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Journal, and the Columbia Law Review, among other journals, and he has authored or edited 2 books of legal theory. A Michigan. Who is that? Let's see, mute. Okay. A Michigan native, Peters earned his bachelor's degree from Amherst College and his law degree from the University of Michigan.
Wait a minute.
Practiced in civil litigation with the Chicago office of Latham and Watkins before beginning his teaching career. He and his family currently reside in Hudson, Ohio. And today, CJ is going to present a discussion on the Trump administration in court, including some important current lawsuits. So with that, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sue. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up. You can hear me, or nods. That's great. Perfect. Happy Sunday afternoon to everyone, and I'm glad to see that the sun is shining, at least where I am. Hopefully it's shining at the Guardians ball game as well. And thanks to everyone for joining. I do have to say before I start that I'm here only on my own behalf. I don't represent my university or my law school, and the things that I'm going to say, the views that I'm going to express are solely my views. They're not views that represent those of my university, the University of Akron, or the School of Law. Okay, having said that. So the topic for today is the Trump administration in court, and it's a huge topic. I've lost count of how many lawsuits have been filed since Inauguration Day against the Trump administration or Trump administration officials or agencies, but they are well over 200. So obviously we can't talk about all of them. I certainly do not have expertise in most of them. So I'm going to try and focus on the cases that have reached the Supreme Court so far. And then maybe if we have time, we can talk about some of the other cases as well. And I want to start by talking about one in particular, which I'll get to in a minute. But my plan is just to I'm going to talk about this one case that I think is the most important, in my view, case that the court has touched so far. I want to talk a little bit about that case, and then just open it up for dialogue and questions and comments from all of you, which I look forward to. And then if we have some time, we can get into some of the other cases as well, and I'll make sure to pause frequently for Q&A. One thing to say initially is that so far, all of the cases that have reached the Supreme Court some of them haven't been decided yet by the court at all. And those that have been decided on procedural grounds, really. They're very preliminary cases. Usually they involve, I think in all cases, they have involved the Supreme Court deciding whether to continue or to overturn some temporary order in the case that was issued by a lower court. And when the Supreme Court does that, it doesn't get to the ultimate resolution of the case when it does that. It usually decides on some procedural grounds. But that said, there have been some really important rulings of law that the Supreme Court has issued in the context of some of these cases. And I want to start with a case that the Supreme Court handed down a decision on just this past Thursday evening, a case called Nome. Nome is Kristi Noem, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, versus Abrego Garcia. Some of you may have heard of this case. So this is a case involving a man named Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, who was born in El Salvador. He came to this country as an undocumented immigrant in his teens, more than 10 years ago. He came here to flee gang violence in El Salvador. And in 2019, a federal immigration law judge issued a ruling that allowed him to remain in this country legally, even though he had come as an undocumented immigrant. And the reason for that ruling was that he had demonstrated that he would likely suffer some severe harm if he were returned to El Salvador at the hands of these criminal gangs. He is married. He's married to a U.S. citizen. They have 3 children, all of whom are U.S. citizens, and he's been living peacefully in Maryland for the last 10 years or so. But in about a month ago, in mid-March, he was apprehended by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents and sent to a detention facility in Texas, and then was deported to this notorious prison in El Salvador, CCOT, the Center for Confinement of Terrorism in El Salvador, that some of you may have read about. And he remains there to this day. And no one has heard from him, although we did hear yesterday from the government that he is still alive in that prison, which is good news. After he was arrested, his family on his behalf hired lawyers who brought a lawsuit in Maryland, in federal court in Maryland, claiming that his removal was illegal and asking for a court order that the government return him. And right away, the government admitted that his removal was in fact illegal because it was contrary to this court order that I mentioned from 2019. And they said that it was an administrative error that had occurred that resulted in them removing him from the country. But they said there was nothing they could do about it. Because he was now in foreign custody and they couldn't bring him back. But nevertheless, the trial judge in Maryland, Judge Paula Zinnis, I'm not sure if that's the right way to pronounce her name, it's Xinis, issued an order last week in which she ordered the government to, quote, facilitate and effectuate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States by this past Monday. And that order was immediately appealed to on an emergency basis to the Supreme Court. And on Thursday evening, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling in the case in which the court unanimously upheld the trial court's order and said that the government had to explain to the trial court what measures it was taking to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to the United States. The one caveat that appeared in that Supreme Court ruling was that the court said that the trial judge had to clarify what she meant by effectuate when she ordered the government to effectuate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. What did she mean by that? And the Supreme Court reminded the trial court to be respectful of the executive branch's authority in the area of foreign affairs and foreign relations. But aside from that caveat, the court essentially affirmed everything that the trial court had done. And so very shortly after the Supreme Court order came down, it came down just before 7 o'clock on Thursday night, which I know because I remember because I was sitting down at an event at John Carroll University to talk about the same thing I'm talking about to you about Supreme Court cases involving the Trump administration. And, 3 minutes before we were starting the program, one of my fellow panelists told me that this order had been handed down. So we ended up talking a lot about that order in the program, as you might imagine. But shortly after the Supreme Court decision, the trial judge issued a new order, and in her new order, she ordered the government to take all available steps to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States, including requiring the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to provide an immediate update on his location and his status, and requiring them to tell her what steps they were taking and what steps they were planning or considering taking to get him back to the country. Yesterday, finally, the Department of Justice did provide an update on his status, a short statement to the court saying that he was still alive and being detained in this El Salvador prison. But the government has still not apparently provided any information to the court about what it is doing or what it plans to do to get him back. So that remains to be seen. So what's the significance of this case? Well, when this case, when the trial judge issued her order and the case was appealed on an emergency basis to the Supreme Court, I believed at that time that this was the most important Supreme Court decision, or would be the most important Supreme Court decision in my lifetime. And the reason I believe that, and still do believe that, is because essentially the Trump administration was taking the position that it could illegally arrest, detain, and deport, remove from the country, a person with a legal right to be here, send them to a foreign country under the auspices of a foreign government, and then could not be told by a U.S. court to bring him back, right? And if you think about the implications of that for a minute, if a court had agreed with that argument, that would mean that the government could, to use the popular phrase, disappear anybody on U.S. soil, including citizens who have a legal right to be here. And just by sending them to a foreign country, which normally would be outside the jurisdiction of the federal courts, they could insulate that decision and take that person out of the scope of any judicial protection at all, right? And that would be, that would literally, I think, be the end of the rule of law if we had a government in this country that could do that without the court interfering. So I think the Supreme Court did, the only thing it could do and the absolute right thing in backing up the trial judge and ordering the government to facilitate getting Abrego Garcia back. And it was a unanimous decision. So that was gratifying. However, I think we're now in a very precarious position still with this case, because, it is still possible that the Trump administration will ultimately disobey the order of trial court, which is backed up by an order of the Supreme Court. And if that happens, it's just unclear what happens next. The judiciary has the power to hold in contempt, in criminal contempt, people who disobey its orders. So it is possible that the trial judge would hold in contempt some Department of Justice lawyers who it deemed responsible for disobeying its orders. It's even possible, I think, that the judge could hold in contempt the head of the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, as the person who's responsible for that. And although I think it's theoretically possible that if the trial judge determined that the president of the United States were the one ordering the disobedience, that she could hold the president in contempt, but I think it's highly unlikely that a court would do that. But even if the judge were to hold some lower level Department of Justice official in contempt for violating the court order, what does that mean? Contempt is something that can be enforced by fines. It can be enforced by jail time. And sometimes if a party, litigant, or their attorney persists in disobeying a court order, a court will send them to jail until the order is obeyed. But who would enforce that? Well, at the federal level, the party that would enforce court orders like that would be the U.S. Marshal Service. And guess who the U.S. Marshal Service reports to? They are part of the Department of Justice. Their ultimate boss is the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. So it's not clear whether the U.S. Marshal Service would carry out an order by a federal court to put someone in jail for contempt of court if that person that they're putting in jail is another Department of Justice employee. And if ultimately, right, what is the backstop? What is the guardrail if the administration were to ignore a court order? In theory, Congress could impeach the Attorney General or even the President for ignoring a court order. I think that does qualify probably as a high crime or misdemeanor. We've had impeachments for probably arguably less than that. But right now, the Congress shows no inclination to oppose the Trump administration on any basis for anything that it may do. So that seems unlikely under current political circumstances. And, I think, not being a political scientist or a political activist really, or a politician, I'm just a law professor, but it seems to me that at the end of the day, the only thing that could potentially hold accountable an administration, a presidential administration that were to disobey a federal court order would be the people themselves. If the people were to express their sustained and serious anger through mass protests, through communications with their representatives in Congress and others, that might have some sort of an effect. Now, I don't know if we're going to get there, but I do think we're in a very dangerous and precarious position right now, where this case could be the vehicle for the Trump administration to simply declare that it's not going to follow a Supreme Court ruling, and that would be a very dangerous place to be. So that's the Abrego Garcia case. I think that's the most important case that's going on right now. There's many others, but let me pause and just invite conversation, discussion, questions, or comments about that. And Tom, I understand you're going to moderate. Is that how this works?
Yeah, thanks, CJ. Usually we save them for the end, but I love this. We're going to change it up. There was one question from Robin where you kind of covered. She's asking the methods that the courts can use to enforce their decisions. It doesn't seem they have an actual executive arm based on your action. They just have fines they can levy and contempt decisions. But like you said, ultimately, that's enforced by the marshals, which is still owned by the executive branch. And they may not have any other way to enforce it. Is that correct?
It's absolutely right. One of the authors of the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, famously said that the judicial branch has neither sword nor purse, doesn't control the army, doesn't control the budget, right? The judicial branch relies on the cooperation of the other branches to enforce its rulings. And normally, that's not a problem. Normally, if a federal court issues an order, then the U.S. Marshals and other agencies of the federal government will enforce that order. But if the order is issued against the executive branch of the government itself, which controls ultimately that enforcement mechanism as a practical matter, it's just unclear what would happen. There is no independent means that the judicial branch has to enforce its orders. That's true in the states too, by the way. All of the state courts depend on state law enforcement officials to enforce their orders, and state law enforcement is part of the executive branch of the state government, not the judicial branch of the state government. So, this is a real issue that has rarely been tested, and it's never been tested at this high a level before. Even in the Watergate controversy, when the Supreme Court ordered President Nixon, to turn over the potentially incriminating Watergate tapes, right? The Oval Office tapes that he had made of many, many conversations. He ultimately capitulated to that. He turned over the tapes rather than try to defy the court's order. So that's the closest we've really come to a president potentially defying an order of the Supreme Court. And in that case, the president backed down. But of course, in that case, there was bipartisan support in Congress for impeachment and holding the president accountable. And you don't have that now, at least not yet. So it's just unclear what's going to happen here. And, I hope that the president respects the rule of law. But if that doesn't happen, we can't, as citizens, count on any other mechanism to, swing into action to bail us out. The only thing that we can really do there is to exercise our power as democratic citizens to make our anger and displeasure known to those who supposedly represent us, not just the president, but our Congress, our members of Congress, and our senators and others. I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, I think my personal position is that we need to be prepared to do that.
When you mention the power of the voters to do these, I think of two specific instances where this kind of precedent in the Abrego case has kind of existed in the United States. One being the internment camps during World War II, where we have citizens that were isolated, against their rights. And then also currently still in existence is Guantanamo Bay, which has some sort of amorphous structure under the military. But there has been a lot of outside political pressure to kind of shift those, even if they weren't ignored decisions from the Supreme Court. Do we see any other way outside of this? Robin followed up saying, what's the rationale for the executive branch to do this? I would assume it's just to have absolute power. I don't know what else the reason is to ignore the Supreme Court other than they can.
Right. I mean, I think that, throughout our history, somewhat remarkably, perhaps, the executive branch ultimately has always obeyed Supreme Court orders. There have been some cases in lower courts where they have not obeyed lower court orders, but when it has come up to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court has issued a ruling, the executive branch has always obeyed it. But we have a situation now where, to my eyes, we have an administration that is consciously attempting to disrupt a lot of the existing norms surrounding our government and our laws. I'm not going to speculate on the motives, but I think we can all do that ourselves, right? But I don't know that there is the kind of confidence that I think we've usually had in the past, that when the Supreme Court, when the judicial system issues its final word, that it will be obeyed. But I may be wrong. I do think there are political pressures. I think that it is, no high-level government official wants to be seen as disobeying the law. And we have a president who is appointed 1/3 of the current Supreme Court himself, right? These are his appointees to the court. 3 of the other justices have been, for the most part, strongly supportive of the president's positions and policies in recent years, including the immunity decision last year before the president was elected to his second term. So I think it would be difficult as a matter of, justification for the president to ignore the Supreme Court order. There, one would hope would be a lot of pressure, even from people who otherwise strongly support the president, for him not to do that. But it's hard to predict what's going to happen there, right? Tom, you mentioned, some of these other circumstances where we have had or continue to have situations where people, non-US citizens in most cases, although not in all cases, who have been sort of detained in a way that seems kind of outside the normal judicial process. Tom, you mentioned the Japanese internment during World War II. Actually, many of those people who were interned were US citizens, right? That was acceded to by the Supreme Court in a couple of few decisions at that time, which have since been strongly sort of repudiated by the court. But that was something that happened with the stamp of approval of the Supreme Court. Guantanamo, the Supreme Court has said that people who were imprisoned in Guantanamo, there was a U.S. citizen who was imprisoned there for a while, and they were returned to the United States. But everyone else who's been imprisoned there, not U.S. citizens, are still entitled to due process. And the Supreme Court has consistently said that about efforts to detain or remove even people who are not citizens, even people who are undocumented, that they are entitled to due process. So I think the court has, recently, I think don't always agree with its decisions, but in this area, I think it's done its job. And it's up now to the other branches of government to respect those court rulings and to back up the courts.
Thanks for that. I think Sue had a comment she wanted to jump in here.
Sure, thanks, Tom. At the risk of presenting a redundancy and concern, it leads my mind to a larger question of, with this potential precedent being set, how can democratic nations confront transnational crime effectively without compromising due process, human rights, and their own moral and legal foundations? For me, how does it affect individuals within our borders who have not formally been charged or tried, if it moves forward in the light that it appears that it may be able to?
Yeah, so there's lots of issues there, Sue. It's a great question. There's no reason that we shouldn't be able to effectively fight transnational crime while still respecting due process. So, for example, the basis upon which many Venezuelan nationals who are immigrants in this country, some of whom documented and some not, were removed and sent to El Salvador last month, was that they are members of a criminal organization, this gang, this notorious Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua. But if that were true, right? If it turns out to be true that these individuals were active members of this criminal gang, then we ought to be able to deal with that. We ought to be able to deport them if they're actually actively committing crimes in this country. We ought to be able to try them and imprison them for that. But all of that has to happen with due process, and the Supreme Court has confirmed that. All of that has to happen with due process. So we can't just, the government can't just say these people are members of a criminal gang and then put them on a plane and send them to a foreign prison. There has to be an opportunity, a notice to those individuals that they may be deported, and an opportunity for them to contest their deportation through a judicial process. The court has said that in a decision just this past Monday, not the Abrego Garcia decision, but another case, right, which we can talk about if we want. So that's always the requirement is that, yes, we want to fight crime domestically and internationally, but we can't just accuse someone of a crime and then punish them for that, either by deporting them or by imprisoning them without an opportunity, for a judicial process to determine whether, in fact, these people are guilty of the criminal conduct that they're being accused of. And then I can't remember. I think there was some other aspects to your question, Sue. I got focused on that fighting transnational crime part, and I've forgotten what else you raised in your question.
Sure. So, for me, I can't help but think about the treatment of individuals within our borders who haven't been formally charged or tried. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who immigrated into this country, just US born citizens. How could the ramifications of this move forward and spill into our rights for liberty and our rights for due process?
Yes, thank you for reminding me that
Sure.
that's a great question as well. Well, it's what we call in the law sometimes a slippery slope, right? I kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago when I was talking about the Abrego Garcia case and the government's position there. The government's position there was, keep in mind the facts of that case are this guy had a legal, he's not a citizen, but he had a legal right to remain in the country because of a court order, and he was removed anyway. So he was removed illegally. So the government's logic there was, well, once we've done that, we've done that. We've sent them now out of the country to this foreign prison. And now the government's position is they're out of reach of judicial process. We don't owe them any judicial process at all, right? That logic is tremendously dangerous, whether you're a citizen or not, because just imagine I'm walking down the street, maybe I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time with some people who I don't know, and we're all rounded up by immigrations and customs enforcement. And maybe some of those people that I'm with are undocumented immigrants. Maybe I don't have my passport on me, right? Or maybe I'm a white middle-aged guy, right? But not everybody looks like me. And yet many people who don't look like me are citizens of this country who may not be walking around with their passports all the time. The government, by this logic, could arrest somebody who turns out to be a citizen, could detain them and deport them on false pretenses or just an administrative error, which is what they claim happened with Mr. Abrego Garcia. And if I am sent to this prison in El Salvador, by the government's logic, that's it. There's nothing that can be done for me unless the government decides in its good graces to try and bring me home, right? So that was the threat, I think, the really severe threat to the rule of law that this case presented. And the Supreme Court properly, unanimously said that that's not right. There has to be judicial process before you can seize someone and remove them from the country. They have to have an opportunity to prove that they are entitled to remain here, right? But we need to think. I think we need to think about all of these immigration cases. Cases involving immigrants, people who are not citizens of this country, or maybe even people who are citizens but weren't born here. We need to think about it in terms of what does this mean more generally, not just for people who we may initially not think are like us, but for ourselves and people who are like us and our friends and our family and our coworkers. Because if the government can do things that are illegal with respect to immigrants and not be held accountable to it, then there's nothing stopping the government from doing things that are illegal with respect to citizens and not being held accountable for it. And that's one reason why we as citizens need to be very vigilant about the rights of immigrants, because the degradation of immigrant rights is a step in a chain which very well could result in threats to our own rights, not that far down the road.
Thank you for that. And as a follow-up, and a curiosity, what what is a pathway or an opportunity for the Garcia family now to go after these levels of the judiciary and the Department of Justice and potentially the executive branch in terms of damages? So whether the DOJ reported that he is alive currently and detained, or if unfortunately he comes to his demise, there are still damages. And what is the recourse the family has in terms of even monetary compensation to set that precedent?
Yeah, another great question. There is law that allows um, people to sue the government for damages resulting from the government's deprivation of their legal rights, including their constitutional rights.
Hallelujah.
So it would, in theory,
Hallelujah.
be possible for look, let's hope that this is resolved and this Mr. Abrego Garcia is brought back to this country. And if the government still wants to remove him, that they go through the process to do that. But if God forbid something should happen to him or someone else as a result of an illegal removal, there is in theory a remedy for that for the family, but it's a damages remedy. And I'm sure that if you, I mean, I don't know them, of course, but if you ask Mr. Abrego Garcia's wife and his kids, you know, does that comfort them that they may have the opportunity to sue the government and recover damages if something does happen to him? I'm sure they would tell you no. They want him back in the country now, because that's the only way to restore, you know, the legal status quo that has been violated by taking him out of the country. And there are lots of obstacles to those damages lawsuits. Official immunity, for one. The plaintiff has to prove that the government officials involved in potentially violating someone's rights knew or should have known that what they were doing was a constitutional violation under clear law. And sometimes that's really hard for them to plaintiffs to show. So yes, there are some avenues there for sure that could be pursued, but you know, and that's something of a deterrent, I guess. But it's still, I think, a little frightening to think that, you know, that the government's position in this has been that it can take someone out of the country, even if it's illegal, and not have to answer to any judicial process in terms of, you know, why they did that, whether that was legal or not.
Ollie asked in the chat, what's your level of concern for threats to protesters or even dissidents? And I think I'm hearing the alarm bells could not be any higher. We even have a student in Connecticut, right? That was recently deported or arrested for protesting, essentially, assumed he was not allowed to be here or not allowed to do that. This also reminds me a lot of showing me your papers type thing, like anybody can be stopped. And I don't love that allusion to anything World War II, but I think this is why everyone is so concerned.
Yeah, I think concern is appropriate. I don't think we should panic, right? I don't think anyone should panic, but I think concern is appropriate. There have been some cases, some publicized cases, including some that have made it to the courts now, where the government has arrested and is seeking to deport non-citizens for their protesting activity. I think the most famous one or well-known one is Mahmoud Khalil, who is a legal permanent resident. He has his green card, but he was involved in pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests during the past, you know, year and a half or so since the Gaza events began. And he was doing it without a mask, and, you know, he was kind of prominent, and he was arrested. I think it's been close to 2 months now. And the government is seeking to deport him based on those activities. That's an ongoing litigation. There's been an immigration judge decision, I think just this past Friday, Thursday or Friday, I think it was Friday, it was 2 days ago, where the immigration judge said that the government had shown that it can deport him, but there's still a lot more process that needs to happen there. The immigration judge didn't consider any of the First Amendment free speech arguments or any of the other constitutional arguments, and eventually a federal court is going to consider those. It's concerning. It's very concerning that the administration right now is going after people, immigrants who are not criminals. There's no criminal conduct that they're being accused of, but rather they're going after them and seeking to deport them because of the content of their speech, the fact that they have participated in public protests. In the recent past, those people have First Amendment protections. It's pretty well established law that permanent legal residents in this country, green card holders, have the same First Amendment rights as citizens do. It's less clear, and I'm not an immigration lawyer, but it's a little murkier when we start getting into temporary visa holders, right? Like people here on a student visa, a work visa, or even a tourist visa. So we're going to see a lot of those issues work through the courts in the next few months, but it is concerning that the government has picked out these people based on their speech, their protest speech. Now, to my knowledge, there have not been arrests of citizens based on their protest speech to this point, but I think we need to be very vigilant about that. I'll tell you though that when you have thousands of people at a legal march, a permitted protest march, like happened last Saturday all over the country with these hands-off demonstrations that some of you may have even participated in. The government can't arrest everyone, even if they wanted to do that. That's a real showing of mass support by the people, mass protest by the people, being supported by the people next to you and everyone else in the crowd. So I'm not concerned at this point that the government is going to start going after peaceful citizens, but who are protesting. But I do think that we need to be very, very vigilant because, again, the going after immigrants first, who have less of a constituency here to stand up for them, is potentially a first step into taking more aggressive measures. And certainly the administration has taken aggressive measures against law firms and members of the press and others that have done things that the administration doesn't like, that have taken positions that the administration doesn't like. So we need to be real vigilant about that.
Michael wanted to bring it back in the chat about back to the enforcement capabilities of the court. And he asks about a potential special marshal that the court could have kind of existing outside of the executive branch. I think Congress has a similar enforcement capability that they can make decisions of jailing and arresting people outside of the executive branch. What is the likelihood that Congress could modify the courts to create its own internal enforcement branch as well? And would that solve the problem that the U.S. Marshal presents? That's
a great question. Congress has I think the Capitol Police, right, have been in the news in recent years as a result, unfortunately, of the January 6th events. And my understanding is that is a police force that reports to the leaders of Congress. It doesn't report to the Department of Justice or anybody in the executive branch. Could we do something like that for the courts? In theory, I don't see any reason why not. It sort of gets into, though, some of the other issues that are being litigated right now in response to some aggressive attempts by the Trump administration to sort of attack existing legal norms and precedents, issues about the separation of powers. One of the things that the Trump administration has one of the positions that it has been pushing is that under the Constitution, all of the executive power rests with the president and the president alone and cannot be checked or controlled by the other branches. And so it might depend. The court has never accepted that position, right? But it has been chipped away at over the years in various forms. So I can imagine the administration arguing, well, you can't have a police force or someone who enforces the law as declared by the courts unless we, the executive branch, have ultimate control over that force. That just hasn't been decided. We don't know. I would love to see Congress, talking about this and trying to do things to provide more protection to the courts from potentially, reluctant executive branch compliance. But, again, right now we seem to be in a place politically where the majority of Congress doesn't have the will to do anything that might oppose this administration. And that gets to the political solutions. It's not just protesting in the streets, but it's also, trying to send the message that there might be political consequences at the polling place if Congress stands by and allows an administration to get away with some of the more aggressive maneuvers to flaunt the law that it seems to be either attempting or considering. So if we can motivate Congress, doesn't take that many, right? Because the margins in both houses are pretty slim right now. We can motivate some members of Congress to start standing up in the middle there, then that might make a difference.
I would like to just bring it back in our last 10 minutes here. Candace kind of expressed her concern, right? If they're only targeting the visas or the green cards or that little gray area that are not quite citizens, but also not illegally here. She would like to know if that seems like a direction. Does it appear to be a direction of the administration? And I think tangentially, how do we protect our own rights as we start to see these types of policies enforced by the federal authorities? Like, what's the best way to protect ourselves if we decide to continue joining protests like the hands-off protests, and then we are confronted with a potential deportation because they don't like what we're saying?
Yeah. How to protect your own rights. I think the first thing to do is to know them. The ACLU has a really good, I think this may have been mentioned in our last call as well, a really good portion of its website. If you go to the ACLU of Ohio or the ACLU of Cleveland chapter, on the website, there is I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically a guide for civil protest or something like that, that has sort of a list of, what you can do legally and what authorities can't do to you. And know that, maybe even print it out and bring it with you. I think that's super important. I think it's important to, here's what I really think is important. If you're in a group of 100 or 1,000 or even a dozen individuals who are protesting, and there is some attempt by someone who may or may not be law enforcement to detain you or arrest you for doing that, there's power in numbers. Demand that the authorities show you their credentials. We've had situations where people who have been taken away, mostly immigrants, by individuals who have no identification showing that they're actual legitimate law enforcement. If one person or two people are being harassed or arrested, the other people in that crowd can say, who are you? What are you? We need to see your identification here. And can sort of help and stand up for the rights of their compatriots. don't fall victim to that bystander effect where, it's all too easy just to stand back and not want to get involved, right? So I think that's part of it as well. Look, I don't want to panic people. There's been no indication so far that, that the government at the federal or state level is going to start going in and busting up peaceful protests. I'm not saying that it won't happen, but that hasn't happened yet. I think that, if I don't know, if I were an immigrant, I would want to make sure that I have a phone number of a lawyer that that I know and trust with me at all times, so I can make a phone call to that person or to a family member who can call a lawyer for me, because it's going to be very, very important, in the early hours, if someone is detained, within that first 24-hour period or so, to get some legal representation who can challenge that detention and make sure that all of the proper procedures are being followed under the law.
I appreciate all of your answers here to this. I threw in some protester checklists into the chat, one from the ACLU, one from Stanford, one from another nonprofit, the activistchecklist.org. I encourage everyone to check them out. If anyone has any last questions, I think now is a good time to wrap it up, throw it in here. We have time for one more if you'd like. Otherwise, I think we're good to call it.
I'm going to inject in one last question. As we're talking about the peaceful protest on college campuses, and yes, it hasn't been compromised in large masses like we saw last week at the hands-off protest. However, we can't deny that Mahmoud Khalil was detained. And it is that gray area. I recognize what Tom was saying, but what legal authority does the federal government have to withhold, say, funding from colleges that allow or don't restrict student protest? And how does that align with First Amendment protections?
Yeah, great question. That's being litigated too. As you may be aware, there's a number of different lawsuits involving those questions right now. None of them have gotten to the Supreme Court yet, but I'm sure that at least one of them will. The government, colleges are protected by the First Amendment too. Colleges and universities are protected by the First Amendment. So if the government is threatening to withhold funding based on expressive activity or viewpoints of the colleges or universities, that is most likely a violation of the First Amendment, unless the government can show some compelling reason for doing that. And there are other legal restrictions as well. The Constitution typically requires some process, some notice in a hearing before government funds that have been promised to someone are just suddenly terminated, right? It's not clear that, I think it is pretty clear that those processes have not been filed in some of these cases. There are some other legal issues there as well, some statutory issues and others. The bottom line is, I think it's very problematic, and I think it's likely that the government has overstepped in some of these cases where it is threatening or has actually removed funding from colleges and universities based on things like whether they have DEI programs in place, or what position they took in dealing with campus protests on the Gaza issue and other things. I think a lot of that is legally problematic. I think as it works its way through the courts, we're going to start getting more court decisions that are going to say that the government overstepped. But we haven't gotten there yet. But we have this effect, this in terrorem effect that we're seeing all over higher education. I can speak to this from some observation myself. We're seeing it with the law firms as well. We're seeing it to some extent, I think, with the press. We're certainly seeing it with members of the immigrant community, where people don't want to be the only ones who try to resist or to step up and say this isn't right. No university, even the most powerful universities in our country, wants to be the only one that is resisting the Trump administration. And so it becomes very difficult for some of these universities to aggressively pursue their legal rights when they feel like, the cost of doing that could be very, very high to them. So I think that's a problem now. We're seeing that dynamic work out. I think as we start getting some court decisions in some cases, I think we may see universities and others become a little bit more emboldened as they become more aware of what their legal rights are and start to get some judicial decisions to back that up. But right now, I think everyone is still a little bewildered and scared a little bit. And we're starting to see some signs of some organized, judicial efforts to resist some of these things. But it's early days yet. So, we'll see how that all plays out. But I kind of rambled a little, Sue, in responding to your question. I'm not sure I actually answered the question.
No, you did fantastic, and I thank you. And it does lend my mind to go to a larger theme, and I want to be respectful of your time today. I do want to mention, when you bring up law firms, the one that stands out in my mind the most as of recent is Peter Weiss and how they capitulated to the Trump administration and offered the $40 million in pro bono and removing their DEI from their institutions. It just raises a larger concern globally in my
Sure
mind.
does. Sure does. And I can comment on that briefly, and then I do have to step off the call, unfortunately. But yeah, it really is, it is sad from my perspective as someone who used to work for a big law firm that has now capitulated in that way. And just as someone who, teaches law and for whom the rule of law is, very much at the core of what I do professionally, it's really sad to see so many of these big, powerful law firms capitulating when, in fact, their legal claims are very strong. We've seen 3 law firms who have chosen to fight and have filed lawsuits against the Trump administration, against these executive orders, essentially seeking to punish them for representing people that Trump doesn't like, right?
Mhm.
And in every one of those cases, they're very early, but in every one of those cases, they immediately got a preliminary injunction from a federal trial court against the administration, right? And the reason for that is that they have very, very strong claims that the administration is violating their free speech rights, their due process rights, their equal protection rights, violating the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, and some other, constitutional principles, in addition to some statutory violations. So it's really sad to see the best law firms in the country, who certainly know that they have good claims here, nonetheless saying we're not going to fight this. Because each of them individually doesn't want to be the one that fights it and risks losing business when they do that, right? If all of these big law firms, this is the best legal talent in the country, right? If all of these big law firms had gotten together 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago and had said, let's fight this, let's join a class action lawsuit, or let's all join together in a single lawsuit and sue the administration to prevent this, I think this would have disappeared, because I think that resistance would have been too much for the Trump administration and the Department of Justice. But the administration has succeeded in isolating them, and one at a time. It was Paul Weiss that got the ball rolling. You mentioned that, Sue, because they're the first ones who capitulated. Once they do that, it becomes much easier for these other law firms to follow suit. And it's sad, because we need lawyers to represent the people like Mahmoud Khalil and like Abrego Garcia. We need lawyers to represent those kinds of people who may have, whose rights may be being violated. And you know, a lot of these big firms were doing a lot of pro bono work for people like Mahmoud Khalil, right? They're not doing that anymore. Now they're going to be doing pro bono work apparently on behalf of the coal industry, as if the coal industry needed free lawyers. So it's really, really sad, because if you don't have the lawyers to actually go to court, bring the lawsuits, defend the criminal defendants, make the arguments, then it doesn't matter what the judges want to do or can do. You're not getting representation. So the private bar is a huge part of the rule of law. And they, like Congress, have a responsibility. It's easy for me to say, I guess, but they have a responsibility to, you know, to carry out their part in all of this. And it's sad to see so many of them, in my view, shirking that responsibility. But and I hate to end on that note.
Agreed.
I
But
do have to leave, unfortunately.
your time is precious. We thank you so much. And if you want to sign off, Professor Peters, I'm just going to give a preview of upcoming for our next call.
I will do that.
So
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sue and Tom and everyone else. And thank you all for being part of this call. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm happy to do it again.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. And to everybody else, I just want to give a reminder that 2 weeks from today, we're going to have our own Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court Judge William Vaudreuil is going to be our guest speaker, and he is going to continue this conversation from a judge's perspective on Trump and his take on the rule of law. So you certainly don't want to miss it. Of course, we are going to create a YouTube channel to archive all of these recordings, but when you are here in real time, you see that our trusted moderator, Tom, will pay attention to your questions in real time. So thank you for joining us. And Tom, if you have anything.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate it, all of your time. I put it in the chat as well, and I can't wait to see you again in 2 weeks.
Great. Thank you, everyone.